Officer Troy Ball with the Morgantown Police Department, and Brian McAllister, local attorney and board member at the Morgantown Crisis Center, RDVIC. So I will hand it over.
Yes. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Hello, good afternoon. We are at the end, and we will keep you awake hopefully till the end, I hope. My name is Larry Hasley. I'm a detective for the Morgantown City Police. I've been assigned to the sexual assault response team for, 12 years now. And we were asked to come and tell you about our journey with the Judy King soft interview room. And I couldn't come and tell the story without these two fine gentlemen. One day, Troy comes into my office and he's all excited and showed me a picture. And once I saw the picture, I thought, hey, dummy, why don't we have this? So I want to turn it over to Troy Ball so he can start the journey. This is the first time that we've done this, so
yeah, for a little sketchy, because I don't think we've ever presented anything ever together. And the dummy he's referring to was him, not me. He wasn't saying, Troy, I'm like, have this because I wanted this. And so the reason why I share this is a couple of things. The next few slides are not going to help you in your investigations, but we want to, there's the information, some of you have received some about trauma-informed interviewing, and this has everything to do with that. Those strategies mean so much more with this room, but I also wanted to share with you about how it happened and that it can be reproduced. So what happened is I went to this place, Conference on Crimes Against Women. I think there's at least one person in this room that's going in a couple of weeks. Great conference. At that conference, I attended a class that says, it's called Trauma-Informed Victim Interviewing. And it's similar to FETI, but I guess a little bit different. Larry will talk about that. I'm not an expert on either of those things. But there's a guy who's speaking, his name is Justin Boardman. And I say to him, hey, that room is really neat. You got to share with me some information about that. He kind of moved me off, it's all good. But then, a couple months later, oh no, it's after the other one. Well, that's Justin Boardman. So he's the one who started all this. So then a couple months later, I ended up in this class in California on behalf of the coalition, with some of the people in this room. And next table over is Justin Boardman. And this class is a week long. I'm like, he's not getting away. I've got him for a week. I didn't, lean over next to him and say, hey, you remember me from Dallas? Yeah. So I bugged him, and I got stuff. And one of the things I got from him to start this was this video.
Sexual assault is coming more to the forefront of our country. People are seeing it. They're seeing it in the military. They're seeing it in athletics. They're seeing it in college campuses.
I once walked into a patient's room. I'd been called in to see a rape victim. And as I walked in the room, she turned to look at me, and her face had been so badly beaten, she couldn't even open up one of her eyes. She'd already gotten some stitches. And the first thing she said to me, she said, you need to know I brought this upon myself. I pulled up a stool next to her, and I said, I don't even know your story, but I will tell you right now, you did not bring this upon yourself, that you were a victim, that somebody did this to you.
Back in the 80s, it was common practice if you went to a party and you drank a little bit, you were like, yeah, whatever, I'm drinking. But the public outcry and education has helped bring down those numbers a lot. That sort of thing is happening with sexual assault now.
Non-reporting is a huge issue nationwide. Utah's no different. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of doubt. People are worried they're not going to be believed by coming forward, especially with a sexual assault.
My background is as a sexual assault nurse examiner. So as a nurse, I'm a forensic nurse. And so my patients are victims of rape, sexual assault, interpersonal violence, child abuse. I have focused more on the sexual assault and rape of late because that's where my research is. Working with police agencies is different with every single police agency. I've had many very tense meetings. I have been told that I'm irresponsible to do research like this and release it to the public. I was working with one law enforcement official, and we were walking down to his office for him to look at these cases, and he stopped as we were walking down the hall and he said, you know, I don't even need to look these up. I can tell you, I bet we didn't screen any of these with the prosecutor's office. And I said, well, how do you know that? And he said, well, all our rape cases are BS.
We don't want to do a bad job. We got into this job to help people. We had what we'd call a soft interview room for our victims. Basically, it had a fake tree in the corner, okay? And it was still a suspect interview room, but it had a fake tree, so it was soft, so it was nice. That doesn't work. To come in here and talk about, if not the worst moment of your life, ever. It's so very good. So, you can physically feel the energy of interviewing a victim of sexual assault from one room to the next room. Where an interview would happen for about 35, 45 minutes in our soft interview up here with our fake tree. Down in the victim interview room now, those interviews are about an hour, hour and a half. I've had 4-hour interviews in there. The interviewer would sit here, which is also comfortable because these things get long, these interviews, and then we would have our survivor here. This is just a much better environment, and it's just more homey. You'd rather talk about things that have happened to you that are very private and traumatic in a room like this than you would up there.
But it's really hard for victims to say the word rape or sexual assault. And so part of the education needs to be, what is sexual assault? What is rape? And helping students understand that and define that.
Okay, it's when someone is getting sexually intimate and then the other person says no or they don't want to and the other person continues anyway.
If a person were to engage in sexual activity without the consent of another person.
Whenever someone feels like they've been violated or taken advantage of in a sexual manner.
Yeah, so it's unwanted sexual interaction with another person, right?
Anything where the girl is not willing at any period of the intimacy, I guess.
We would love to encourage people to come and talk to an advocate. You don't have to report to talk to an advocate. Come and talk to an advocate. Come and see what your options are, what your resources are. Because even if you don't report a crime, there are resources out there to help you through, the healing, to get the counseling that you need.
If you are a victim of sexual assault, there are resources for you. There are a lot of people who are looking out for you and who want to help you.
If you've ever been at an adjudication and a sentencing, there's an opportunity right when he gets sentenced for the victim to tell the court how their life has been since, or what happened, and how they feel and what they feel should be done as far as justice-wise is concerned. And to see a couple victims in my past go from victim to survivor at that point is hugely empowering.
Okay, so my first point is, if I had not left home for training, I would never have seen any of this. And I would never have met Justin. I would not have brought this home. West Virginia has a lot to offer nationally in sexual assault and domestic violence investigation legislation. You may not believe that, but it's true. I've been other places. We have a lot to offer, but we have not cornered the market in how to respond to these things. So for those of you who plan to train or plan somebody else's training, please get them out of here for a while. Go somewhere else, find out how somebody else is doing it, and if they have something that's of any value, steal it. Or ask for permission. I asked for permission, and he gave it to me. And Alliance for Hope International is where I was for training on strangulation investigation. So, and that's where I cornered Justin and finally got all the rest of the stuff. So I showed that video to my friend Larry, and I'm like, we gotta have one of these. And Larry, of course, if any of you know Larry, and I know some of you do, I heard you talking about it in the hallway, you know, he jumped up and down, yeah, we gotta have one of these like right now. And so, you know, our police department does not have a budget of even $5 for something that doesn't like shoot, drive, or get worn or something like that, right? All right, yeah, heads are nodding. So the question is, how do we get one of these? And how do we pay for one of these? Because they're not free. Well, not really. So Larry?
Yeah, so first of all, our office is only so big. And naturally, there's an office right next to the detective office at the police department. And in that office is our traffic division, which is about 4 or 5 officers, and they have desks on top of desks. And it's literally right next to our office. So right away, we kind of put a target on that room, but it meant that those guys would have to be kicked out of their office. So once we had the idea of where we wanted to put it, it was about the money. So Troy and I went to the chief and showed him that same video that we shared with you. And it's not like, you know, reinventing the wheel. It's already being done. And we said, hey, chief, this is what we want. So to our surprise, he said, well, I'll worry about the space. You tell me how much it's going to cost. This was November of 2016. He gave us until January 6th. So over the holidays, Troy and I ran around town going to different businesses and RDVIC. We got the gentleman in the corner here, Brian McAllister, involved early. And Troy's idea was a genius one because he said if we gave the chief a budget of $0, he can't tell us no, right? So we wanted to do everything we could to say it's not going to cost the department anything with space. So in January of 2017, we approached the chief, told him it was going to be $0. And this was the letter that we provided to the community. Now, you're not going to be able to read it, but it was very overwhelming for me. It was very overwhelming for Troy, how the community reacted to our ask. And it's overwhelming right now, standing here in front of you, because this gentleman is an attorney in Morgantown for Bailey and Lasser. He is not being compensated for being here. He's a member of our community. And he came all the way down here to speak for 3 minutes. To talk about his perspective, being a member of our community, to tell you his perspective.
I don't know whether to thank you or not. Leave it up to the police to limit a defense lawyer's time. You know, let me say from the start that since this room opened on April 5 of last year, I've been talking about it straight through. Family, friends, strangers, whoever will listen, because I'm so proud of what we accomplished in creating this room and providing a resource to our community. Troy and I sat down at a local restaurant, and a couple of the pieces to the recipe had already been satisfied. Right? We had a host agency that was willing and able to engage in a trauma-informed means of carrying out investigations of violent crime. Check. And by the way, I can't thank these guys enough, as well as the entire department, including the chief, for taking that position. We also needed members of the community, other community partners, to lead the effort, to help us plan, to help us execute, right? So, along with our DBIC, we joined up with these fine gentlemen, as well as their chief, and the Title IX folks at WVU, and that was our team. That's how we got the work done. But Troy and I looked across the table at each other, and we said, well, we just told the chief that it was going to cost a big goose egg for the department. How are we going to do it? And I said, I have no idea. But I'm not afraid to ask friends and strangers alike to contribute to what is for sure a valuable project. It's an easy sell, and everyone in this room can do it with confidence. The money part really sort of fell into place fairly quickly. Companies, individuals, community foundations, they didn't need much from me. One letter, which you saw, and a few questions sealed the deal. We raised probably $6,500 in cash fairly quickly. And then we relied on in-kind donations to do the rest. Folks like Lowe's stepped up and contributed an immense amount of in-kind contributions in the forms of labor, paint, curtains, flooring, all the stuff that makes the room one of the finest soft interview rooms in the country. And by the way, I mean that. Our soft interview room is one of the, and frankly, I think it is, the nicest soft interview room in the United States right now. Fact. And challenge. Take it as a challenge. Beat it. And do it. We'll help you. We'll help you to make an amazing room. But a lot of folks stepped up. And really, it's all about just not being afraid to ask the question. Will you contribute? Will you contribute? Will you contribute? Just keep doing it. We had a lot of luck, and I don't know if you're still cycling through the slide, but as you can see, there's a ton of support in our community for this type of project. Child Advocacy Center consulted with us on the types of colors you can use to help create a more welcoming atmosphere. The folks at Champion Trophy and Awards helped to create the plaque for the room, and a number of other folks. LuLaRoe representatives through a sale and donated a percentage of the proceeds. So there are any number of ways that you can do this, and if you look at the news, and I know I'm over 3 minutes, right? If you look at the news and you do a search about soft interview rooms, you can see that folks can spend upwards of $20,000 on those rooms. We didn't do that. We spent far less than that. So it is achievable. And you all have to tailor your projects on the space that you have available and the needs and the desires of the host agency. Ultimately, the folks at the Morgantown Police Department were incredibly willing to craft what is, again, the finest example of a soft interview in the country. So I'm really proud to have been a part of it, and I'm willing to help each and every one of you to start this up in every community in our state. Anywhere, you just let me know.
Thank you.
So again, this is completely obtainable for everybody, but the work might be different, and the room that you do might be, really very different depending on what you have. But this is our interrogation room, and for years before we had a soft interview room, this is where interviews with survivors occur.
Yeah, I actually use this slide in the presentation that I do on trauma-informed interviewing. This slide was in my presentation, and I used this slide to show how you can give a survivor of a sex crime a little bit of control. I use this slide. You can give her a little bit of control by letting her pick which chair to sit in. I mean, I look back at even myself. This is the slide I use for that. You have one of three choices. You either sit in front of the mirror or you sit in a corner. And this is where we did our interviews for years. So this is the space, and since I sat through all of Tom's, did everyone get to see Tom? We all did this morning. He's a great presenter. So we decided to focus more on the room, and we wanted to talk a little bit about a trauma-centered interview. But we're not going to have enough time for that, but we'll brush on that. But it's more fun to tell stories. So the traffic unit, the chief threw out of the office next to our office. But they got the better end of the deal because they got a really big office now. So they have, room for 5 desks. They have room for all of their folks. So
which, by the way, really saved us.
Right,
saved us. If you can imagine being the 2 officers that got somebody evicted out of their office, I was concerned for my safety.
But this is what they left us with. And now Troy put these pictures together. I'm not real happy about the next one. I didn't realize I was so bald on the top there. So.
That is proof that Larry does physical labor. But that is all the physical labor he did.
I actually paid for that picture, so that was it. And like Brian said, the folks from Lowe's, they came in, they tore that room apart, they pulled up the carpet, they did all the wiring for us. Everything from the flooring, baseboard, paint on the wall, the labor to do it, the curtains, the wall outlet covers. They gave us all of that stuff. They gave us the lamps that are on the desks. They gave us the area rug on the floor. Just overwhelming support from the community. Valspar gave us the paint. And the biggest piece is Troy and Nana. I know Nana's in here. There she is. Nana's our RDBIC director. And the 3 of us went to Star Furniture, and we were picking out furniture. And of course, we wanted the best of the best because we were going to have to clean it, because you never know who you're going to bring into your room. So we wanted leather. We wanted the best leather that we could clean. Of course we did, right? But it was very, very expensive. So again, Troy put this together. We couldn't help ourselves but to pose with the Superman statue. And we were there for a brief amount of time, and there's the contractor putting up the curtains for us.
Who, by the way, volunteered his time. He does not work for Lowe's, but he's a subcontractor for Lowe's. But when we found out what he was doing it for, they reached out to him and just told him what they wanted, what they needed, because they donated the blinds. When he found out what it was for, he donated his time. Which was how, that was the other thing I wanted to share. That's how all of this went. Nobody said no to us. Everyone we approached said yes and did something for us. And that's how I know this can be done everywhere. What are the odds? We were hoping for something. Nobody told us no.
Yeah, and the point of our story with our journey isn't to say, hey, look what we had, we're awesome. The point is, we were just a handful of people that had an idea, and we made it happen, and we didn't spend a cent. The communities that you're in will do this for you. I promise you they will. And I'm willing, I know Troy's willing, I know Brian's willing, we are willing to come and help you do it. We can use the resources with Walmart. There's Walmarts everywhere. There's Lowe's everywhere. So it can be done. It's just a matter of finding the space. And I know that's tough. It was tough for us. But when I got that call from Star Furniture, and we were actually at another furniture store in town because we were in a hurry, because we had a deadline of April 5th to open it. And my cell phone rang. So I had to walk away from the sales lady of the other furniture store in town. And the guy says, we talked it over. I talked to the other owners. We're going to go ahead and do it for you. And I said, oh, that's great. That's great. How much is it going to be? He's like, no, we're going to do it for you. I said, yeah, I understand that. I appreciate that. Well, what's it going to cost? No, you're not understanding me. We're going to give it to you. So we had already picked out, you know, the top of the line.
I feel like I need to qualify this a little bit. Larry started on it, and Brian mentioned that we consulted with Dr. DePage and Karen Hedges, who is then working at the Child Advocacy Center, and we talked to them and said, how do we set up a room that's inviting for somebody to talk to us? You heard this morning about all the reasons why people don't want to talk to us and all the things that we can and should do to help them, you know, get to where they want to share this terrible tragedy, this terrible part of their life with us. And like Larry said, you don't know what's going to happen. And Justin Boardman was the one who really convinced me on things like leather, for example. And Dr. DePage confirmed it, because Justin will say that he's had survivors in his interview room that relive the moment to the point where they vomit. And I see some head shaking. So it's a real thing. So we're trying to figure out what material can we clean. So do we want, like, our strategy was we either get the cheapest casket we can throw out every time somebody vomits, or we get something like this that we can actually clean and keep for a while, which is actually going to be more cost effective in the end, and since they're donated, then this was the obvious choice. And there are things other than vomit that you need to concern yourself when you're inviting people into your room. So the pillows are very pretty, but the pillows serve a purpose in his interviewing techniques. For those of you who do interviews, you understand some people want to hold on to something. The textures are important. Dr. DePage told us to do a focus wall. That's why one wall is blue and the rest of them are white. And then the light canceling blinds are important because it helps with the distraction and that sort of thing. So everything in that room, he mentioned the carpet was donated to us. They brought us the flooring that they said would survive anything. So that's the hard flooring. So remember, like, you know, you could have somebody vomit, you could have any number of things happen in this room when Larry's doing a really good interview. We didn't want to have to throw out an entire floor. But we also didn't want to have something that was cold and impersonal. So we got this nice looking, you know, hardwood looking laminate stuff that'll take anything, but we throw in this area rug. The area rug's like $100 or something like that. Maybe it's $150 or something like that. But it's not the cost of a whole floor. If something happens, we need to ditch the rug, we ditch the rug. We need a new one. It's not that big of a deal. So we don't worry about what's going to happen to this room, just what we're going to get done in this room. Even the pictures were done by a superior photo, in fact, in Morgantown. And so we did, you know, we promised all these sponsors that we would at some point get them in front of a camera or you know, newspaper, whatever it was. So, and part of the deal has always been to spread the word about this room because we really believe in the effects of this room. So we had a media day, and the Dominion Post and some others came, and the Dominion Post put this video together.
Moving forward with this soft interview room, we'll change the way that victims are treated. We will focus more on the victim themselves and listening the information from them and from trying to help them through some of the most traumatic events of their life. It's bad enough that they get victimized when the event happens, and then rape cases to have to go through the institutional setting of the rape collection kids in the hospital, which is again another trauma. And then the interview with the detectives, which is again is another trauma, to be followed up in court again when they're cross-examined or confronted, by the offender and the offender's attorney during the court process. And so this is one of those things that maybe we can take out some of the trauma out of their lives and environment.
I think it's fair to say that we can take a page from the WVU book, It's on Us, on Lorian's t-shirt today, because the folks here in this community and you folks here today believe that it's on us. And if we aren't the leaders and make the decisions that are cutting edge for this type of investigation, this type of room, and this type of prosecution, we will fall behind, and our community deserves to be leaders in that type of progress and in that type of enlightened thinking.
It's just incredible that so many people donated money and furniture and flooring and paint and everything that put the room together. But Troy Ball, Officer Troy Ball, and Detective Larry Hasley were the main drive behind it. And I was totally surprised that they honored me by naming the room after me, but it feels good after this many years to be able to have a room named after you. This will put people at ease and make them feel cared for, which is what advocates try to do, is to make the victim feel cared for and important and safe. And I think this room says all that.
So we just had our 1-year anniversary of it being open on April 5th. And we've been keeping track of all of the opportunities we've had to use the room. And I was pretty blown away by the number of times we've actually used the room. 36 survivors of violent crime have been interviewed in the room since April 5th of 2017. And ironically, when Troy and I were putting these figures together, it was actually being used that day. So as of April 5th, 2018, it's been used for 37 survivors, witnesses, and family of either witness or survivor. Crimes range from any sex crime, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, strangulation, victims of child pornography, armed robbery, overdose, and or suicide. I was asked by the Montague County Sheriff's Department, one of their investigators called me and said, hey, you know, I have this survivor from this terrible sex crime. I need to use that room I've heard about. So obviously we opened our doors. So we did an interview for the Sheriff's Department in the room. We were approached by the ATF. There was a string of armed robberies, and they interviewed the victims of those armed robberies in the soft room. And there was a small law enforcement agency in Ohio that a student from West Virginia University was attacked and raped in his jurisdiction. And he was having a hard time setting up an interview with her to come back to Ohio to do the interview. So he got on Google and Googled Morgantown Police Department and found that piece about our soft interview room. So he called us and asked if he could use the room. So he actually came to Morgantown and did his interview in the room. It wasn't too long ago, we got a call from NCIS. I thought it was just a TV show. It's actually a real agency that do that. It's the Navy. My dad was in the Marine Corps, so anyway, all jokes aside, NCIS called and said, hey, you know, we had this sex crime happen in Hawaii. The survivor is local to Morgantown. Can I come and do a lineup at your department? And I said, of course. So he shows up, and he comes into the office, and you know, I'm introducing him to everyone, and I take him over to the room, and I open up the room, and he comes to the threshold, and he's, what the hell is this? So he was so taken back by the room that he actually sent me this email thanking us for allowing him to use the room, and basically he says, you know, other agencies had lent him interrogation rooms for interviews in the past, and this was a much better environment. So he even took note of the difference of an interrogation room and an interview room. So that gives us about a half an hour, I think, to talk about victim-centered, offender-focused interviews. Yeah, please, yes.
Is there a need for sustained funding for your room? I mean, once it's all been put together, do you need money to continue to come?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it because I forgot to mention it. Because most everything was donated, and we still have a large amount of money that was donated, RDVIC has an account that is there just in case something would happen. I don't know the dollar amount, and that's a good question for Nana, but like, you know, we have enough room where we need an extra end table for another lamp. the overhead lighting drowns out the camera, so we need another end table, so we're working on that. So all of those funds are available. There's a large, do you know the number off the top of your head?
It's around 4,000 that we have left.
You say around 4,000?
Yeah.
Or Brian, do you know, I know you guys were looking at that.
It's in that neighborhood.
So in addition, the start of the room is the real expense, and if we had to replace the couches, they're crazy, but other things are less expensive, so once you get it, then keeping it is not nearly as bad as trying to get it.
Right.
Yeah, we have in our minds that we may need to replace pillows. We have blankets, because sometimes it gets cold in that room. We did buy a space heater, because it sometimes gets chilly. So we have that money there just in case.
So you're really not looking to the community for funding if you need it?
Not continuous funding, if that's what you're talking about, just the startup.
So, before I dive into the victim-centered interviewing, sitting through Tom's presentation, he's a great presenter, and he preaches the same thing that I go around and preach, the exact same thing. So, because of that, I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of my experience being in the room. The very first time it was used, I was actually out of town, and one of our other investigators used the room for a sex crime survivor. And at the time, I was out of town. I had no idea it was being used until I started getting text messages from an advocate. As soon as they left the room, the young lady had told the advocate how amazing the room was, and it was unprovoked. So the advocate asked her if she could text me to tell me, because she knew what we just went through to try to get the room up and running. So I started getting these texts, and of course, I wasn't the one to get to use the room first, but just the fact that we had feedback from someone that was unprovoked was very touching. I've done interviews on a cold case, a young lady who was interviewed in an interrogation room in 2015. We had some movement on a case, and I wanted to bring her back in to do another interview. And when she came back in, we went into this room instead of the interrogation room. And immediately, I got feedback. When did this happen? It's amazing to me, the feedback right away without being provoked. And I was telling Tom about this over lunch. When you're doing an interview for a sex crime survivor, a lot of us know that, especially when they're talking to the police, they're closed off. They don't want to talk to you. There's a lot of conversation to break the ice, if you will, to get them to open up and talk to you. Big fan of advocates. You need to have an advocate in your room, not to get ahead of myself. But this room takes a lot of that away. We walk into that room, and it takes, you still have that conversation because you want to get to know them, you want them to get to know you, you want to answer the questions. But just being in that environment, it takes so much of that stress off. There's, without the two-way mirror, without sitting in the little tiny box of a room, it's pretty special. So if you're at all able to make it happen, I would absolutely recommend it. And at the last SART meeting we had, the hospital is now maybe kicking around the idea of putting a soft room in for when survivors show up at the hospital. So it's, we're getting the word out. Obviously, responding to a sexual assault, we want to keep an open mind. And Troy's going to talk a little bit about the biggest part that we see is educating our frontline officers on what to do and what not to do, because those are the first people, those are the first faces that these folks see. This is one of my favorite slides. Tom used a version of this during his presentation, the cycle of mistrust. An investigator approaches the case with skepticism. A lot of you in this room have heard my story. I'm probably tired of hearing my story, but you know, I was one of those guys that I've been doing this sex crime work for almost 12 years. And I was one of those guys. I get the call from the sergeant. Is this a real one? Came out of my mouth. So when you start an investigation with that, that's never good. Because what happens is the victim senses your doubt. And they don't want to cooperate. And of course, when someone doesn't cooperate with the police, what happens? We get frustrated, and then we say, you know what? I knew this was a BS case anyway. So that reinforces the number one, and then it just keeps on going. So I put this slide in here not to insult anyone's intelligence, but we are not allowed to polygraph victims of sex crime. We all know that. So when you're doing a victim-centered approach, there's two interviews. The preliminary interview is always mostly done. I mean, we're spoiled in Morgantown, I know it. We have investigators that come out. The preliminary interview, when the victim either presents to the hospital, comes into the police station, or calls 911. And then the second part, which is the detailed follow-up interview. The written statement. Do we take written statements from sex crime victims? Yes, no? Yeah? You know, I've been having a little deep conversation with myself over the past couple days about this question. But the answer is no. Unless there's always an exception to the rule. All that fancy stuff, I didn't know that was there. So, we want to use the information that's collected from the interview from the initial officer that goes to the hospital or shows up on the station, right? We want to use the information that's collected in the sex crime kit, the paperwork that's on the bottom of the kit. That is gold. You need to read that to see what the survivor's telling the medical folks. And then obviously you schedule a follow-up interview. And you don't want to get a defense attorney anything to scrutinize. Had a case one time where one of our guys got a written statement from a sex crime victim, and it was about 3.5 sentences long. The defense attorney says, you know, waving the statement around, this is the worst thing that ever happened to you in your life, and you describe it in 3.5 sentences, right? But now, I'm going to talk to you about the conversation I've been having with myself. This is fresh. This is brand new, right? Or you guys think I'm crazy? So we have all this experience now because we've all been to these trainings about victim-centered interviews, right? So now and trauma-centered interviews. So we can explain away the survivor's behavior, right? So we can explain that stuff now, why they're acting that way. We can explain it because we all know it now. So I just wonder if that's food for thought about taking a written statement, or what Troy's going to talk about using your body camera or not when you're first interacting with a sex crime victim. So the exception to the rule would be in a domestic situation, get the story before the story changes. Until the next time when I decide what I think I want to do with that. But, preliminary interview.
Okay, so Larry's done all his work and also detectives, all as they've traveled, they've received extensive training on how to do these interviews. But Patrol has a really good opportunity at this point to completely screw it up before Larry ever gets to it. One is by taking the written statement. Larry and I will have to talk about that later, because I have the foggiest idea why he thinks we ought to take one. The other is turn your body camera off. For the law enforcement in the room, if you've been paying attention, reading the articles, law enforcement doesn't accept new things anyway, but body cameras were a particularly sensitive thing. We haven't been upset about, or that upset about anything since like the in-car video. But the thing about it is though the camera always records the truth, it doesn't always record perspective. And so if you were listening to Tom this morning, or if you were in a session, you may have heard where he talks about survivors may behave in ways that are just completely opposite of what you would think somebody who just survived a serious traumatic event should be. And if you capture that on camera, you capture them making jokes on camera, saying just really ridiculous things, that's going to be played in court. And it's advisable to have an expert in the room anyway, but now they've really got a lot of work to do. And if I'm really pressing this person for a lot of things, then I'm screwing up what Larry's going to do down the road. So I need to leave them alone. I need to get just this preliminary stuff. Do I even have jurisdiction? If I don't have jurisdiction, then I'm out. I need to call somebody else. And then you have, crime scene considerations. Do we have evidence that we need to protect and secure? So I need to ask, where did this happen? And then we need to figure out, do we need a search warrant? Is there somewhere we need to go? Is there somebody that, is somebody in danger right now? Is this person assaulting somebody else? Or going to do something to somebody else? So these are things that we need to find out. Patrol needs to do. It needs to know these things. So try to identify them, get brief descriptions, and all these things. But really to avoid we were talking about earlier, even Tom said, who, what, where, when, how, why. And the Sergeant Friday reference that Tom made this morning. That's what we do. We go in there. What happened? Tell me what happened. Stop laughing. Tell me what happened. You got to stop crying and settle down and tell me what happened. We don't want to do that anymore. We want to get just this real basic information and let Larry or Detective Stallings or somebody else with that sort of experience get in there and do this really good interview. If I get a whole bunch of stuff and I record all this stuff that's coming from a place where you heard this morning, they're not able to correctly recall what happened anyway often. So it's going to be, if I go and document a bunch of things I said, it's going to be contradictory or maybe contradictory to what an interviewer gets later. So I don't want to do that. I don't want to set them up for that. And it's not really good information anyway. So I don't want it. It's not of much use to me. If there's now somebody I need to go get right now or something I need to protect right now or something along those lines, then it's of no use to me. And it's only going to serve to harm him later until I find out what he means about that statement. So, what was the next one? So, and we advise officers, listen, they may behave in ways that you don't understand, but please just, essentially be kind, be respectful, don't argue. You'd be surprised some of the terrible things that, I've been on the job 21 years, and like, Tom said the first rape investigation he did was nothing like the last one that he did. And my performance 20 years ago is nothing like what my performance now is. So, yeah, I really messed them up. But now we want to make it simple. So we did like a 15-minute roll call training that Larry and I put together, and I did for roll call, for briefing training. Doesn't cost the police department anything. And, patrol officers get a sexual assault at the hospital or on station or whatever it is, like, oh my God, I don't want to deal with that. Well, hey, listen, I'm going to make it a whole lot easier for you. This is one you don't have to worry about. You have very little responsibility. Find out, be nice and stuff, find out what's going on, get preliminary stuff, and contact the detectives, get your instructions from there, and then take that information and get out. Get good contact information so the detectives can make an appointment to meet with them later. So release some of that tension and stress for responding officers and try to prevent them screwing anything up so they can do this stuff. And of course, and always, if you look back at the letter they were on there, the room is designed this way. Everything that we do is designed to include a victim advocate right off the bat, right from the very beginning. That's our design to do that. So.
Yes, advocates are the best practice. If you're not using them, I would encourage you to create a relationship with your local advocacy center. If you don't have one, if you don't know if you have one, reach out to Frizz. They will be happy to make that connection for you. Again, I've been doing this kind of work for 12 years, and having an advocate in the room You know, I could go on and on and on about the interviews that I've done that would have not happened if an advocate was not in the room. Me being able to not to bridge that gap to the victim during that interview. And, you know, we're not counselors. We're slowly learning what to say and what not to say in these interviews. But they are a large part of our success with sex crime investigations. Just know that if you're working with a community-based advocate, the communications between your survivor and the advocate are confidential. In some cases, we've had paperwork signed where an advocate can testify. I won't get into that, but it's possible. I choose to not break that confidentiality if you don't have to. A couple ways: having the advocate at the hospital, the relationship we have with our SANE nurses. You know, we've been in situations where it's an incident that happened right now. The victim's at the hospital, the advocate's at the hospital, our officers at the hospital, and we have a guy that we don't know where he is, but we know where the crime scene is. So we've been able to utilize, you know, communications with the advocate with the permission of the survivor in that emergency room, with the officer and the SANE nurse and the advocate. I know I may have said those a couple times, but communicate with us, the investigators, to be able to, I know the one case we used, the young lady remembered that this incident happened in this apartment near where she used to live in town. So I immediately got on my computer, Google Street, Google Earth. I knew where she used to live, so I just went down the street and did screenshots, and I texted the advocate and the SANE nurse screenshots until we found which apartment it happened in. And she's like, yeah, that's the apartment, that picture. If you're looking at the place, it's the one on the right with the WVU blanket in the window. So sent a guy up, there's a WVU blanket in the window of that particular apartment. We got a search warrant, went in, woke the guy up, he's still sleeping, all the evidence is still there. And, you know, without that relationship between the SANE nurses, the advocates, and our officers on the front line knowing what to do, that wouldn't have happened. Wouldn't have happened. Let's see. Okay. So, we don't have too much time, but before you do a follow-up interview, I know I talked about the paperwork on the bottom of the sex crime kit. Make sure you're getting that. Read that before you go into the interview. More than likely, the information that your frontline officer has with that initial interview and the information on the kit, there's going to be something new and exciting you're going to want to read in that paperwork. You're going to want to make sure you have all the information before you go into that interview. Select the location. Obviously, we want to do it in our soft room. Who's going to be present? Obviously, we want an advocate. Medical professional, I've never done that. I used to have family member on here. I've only done that once, so I would advise against it. But one time I did use it, it worked, but definitely an advocate. This is the slide that I was telling you about. How do you give a victim some control going into the interview room? Let her sit where she wants. And then the 2 sleep cycle rule, which is something that's, everyone's heard about that now, right? Everyone knows about the 2 sleep cycle rule? That's exciting. I used to say that, and people were like, wow, what are you talking about? What do you mean? So, it's all about the trauma and disorganization that Tom talked about. If you were in a Tom's session, he talked about this. Critical incident amnesia, tunnel vision. I always tell the story about an accident that I was in way before I became a police officer. I was on my way to play racquetball, was in a really bad accident. I was in a Hyundai, little tiny Hyundai years ago when they were made of aluminum foil and toothpicks, and I got I was in the passenger seat in this big Ford Bronco back when they were made of like solid steel and rocks, and smashed into my side, and I got really messed up, and I was stuck. They had the jaws of life me out of it. It was freezing cold. It was in January, and all I remember is this guy in my face screaming and yelling at me about, you know, to stay awake. Stay awake. And he covered me with a Garfield blanket. Oh, I remember that. But I remember being cold, and I remember being in pain, and I remember Garfield and this guy yelling at me. So I ended up in the hospital. I crushed my pelvis. I was in really bad shape. I was in the hospital for weeks. And a couple weeks go by. One of my really good friends came in to see me at the hospital, and she's like, you know, if this had to happen, I'm really glad it happened in front of Tom's house. I'm like, what are you talking about? You know, Tom, he was there. What do you mean, Tom? Tom was this guy that I worked with at the mall for years. We were friends. It was his house. He was an EMT. And he was the guy yelling at me in my face. I had no idea. I had no idea who he was until I put that together weeks later. So this is why we wait. This is the statistics that came from someone smarter than me. Before your first sleep cycle, you just get general information. After your first 24 hours, first sleep cycle, you may add about 50 to 90% to your memory. And then after 2 sleep cycles, you're closer to 100%. And of course, there's always an exception to the rule, right? There was a young lady who was at the hospital, and she was flaming mad, like Tom talked about earlier. You can have a victim who's crazy mad, you can get a victim that's crazy crying, you can get a victim that's crazy laughing, or all of them at the same time, right? So this young lady was very pissed, and she says, I don't want to wait 2 days, I want to come in right now. And I'm like, oh, no, you don't remember, you 2 sleep cycles. And she's like, no, after I'm done in the hospital, I'm coming down. I'm coming down. I said, okay. So she starts talking to me about, I'm not from Morgantown, but I remember walking up this really steep hill. And I remember walking up the hill, and the house was on the left. The house was on the left-hand side of the road, and there was a little block wall. I'm walking up, and there's this little block wall, and you walk up these steps. You walk up these steps, and you go on the front porch. I remember going onto the front porch, and you look to the left. When you look to the left, there was a really ugly plaid couch sitting on the front porch. I remember walking up there, and I saw that couch. When you walked into the front door, on the left was the living room. You walk into the living room, and there was a fireplace. Along the fireplace were all these empty liquor bottles. I remember that. And I remember walking up through the living room, and then you went up a set of steps. And when we went to the top of the steps, the first room on the right, there was a blue couch, and that's where it happened. So she leaves the hospital, she comes to my office, she gets in my car with me, we drive up this hill, she points this house out, we get a search warrant, we go in, and this is what we find. And guess who's sleeping on the couch? The bad guy. The bad guy was from up in New England somewhere, and he was just transient. He came through, he was on his way to Las Vegas. He quit his job in New England and was driving to Las Vegas in a rental car. Had no attachment to Morgantown, had no attachment to that house. And had she not been pissed off, and had I not listened to her, we'd never know who he was. So think about those exceptions to the rule. There's always an exception to the rule, right? All right, is anyone from Frizz here? Are we done at 3:30 or 4:30? It's 4:25. Well, we'll go over a couple more slides, just so she doesn't throw stuff at me. You always want to explain the purpose of the interview. And again, this is just driving what Tom was saying. You know, let them know it's okay to say, I don't know, because they may not know. And you'd rather have someone tell you, I don't know, than to tell you that the guy was wearing a blue shirt when actually it was red. Right? Right? So it's okay to say, I don't know. And then you want to explain why the difficult questions need to be asked, and everyone knows what the difficult questions are. The difficult questions are about the detailed story about what happened. Now, I almost forgot to plug my buddy Russell Strand and his FETI. Frizz is hosting a FETI class. It's Forensic Experiential Traumatic Interview.
It can't be called that.
It's not? Called something else.
But we're not allowed to use that.
Okay. It's the same kind of stuff. It's in June. It's in Bridgeport. Right? I think so. Check it out on the Frizz website. They're doing a trauma center interview class. It's going to be done by Mike Milner, who's the guy that got me to drink the Kool-Aid years ago. Mike and Russell are buddies. And I carry this little sheet around. Anytime I do one of these interviews, I have this little sheet. And, you know, I'm going off the slides now, so we only have a little bit of time. But, you know, there was a case just recently that I helped the sheriff's department out on. It was a situation where an Uber driver had sexually assaulted a young lady. And, you know, we talk about asking questions about the senses. Tell me about what you smelled. Tell me about what you heard. Tell me about what you felt. Well, the most recent case that I use this, it says right here on this little sheet of paper, and whoever wants to get this after class, I'm really not allowed to promote it because it says that F word on it. FETI. I don't know what I'm talking about. If you go off this little checklist, it reminds you, this little half sheet of paper is the key for these interviews. No kidding. I asked her to tell me more about what you were feeling. And she remembered being cold, and she remembered being in the front seat of the car. And she remembered reaching down and trying to get away, and she remembered feeling something tinny because she was hitting it with her fingernails, and it was tinny. And there wasn't any carpet. There wasn't any carpet. And as I'm asking her these questions to tell me more about what she was feeling, she kind of went away. She wasn't in the soft interview room. She was in that car. And I got chills watching her answer these questions because she was there to tell me about feeling this tinny. There wasn't any carpet, it was tinny. Well, when they identified the guy and went to arrest him, they found his car, obviously. And he kept saying how she was in the back seat the whole time. But the front seat, where she said she was, guess what? He had ripped the carpet out. There wasn't any carpet on the front passenger seat of the car where she was. And she remembered that tinny feeling and it not having carpet. And there was no way she would have known that if she hadn't been in that front seat. So there was a time I'd have thought I was crazy asking someone what they felt or what they smelled or what they tasted. But you'd be surprised the great evidence you get when you ask those questions. So I'm completely out of time, and I appreciate you listening to our journey. Anything you need along the way, if you choose to do the soft interview room, if you want to come see it, come check it out. If you want to use it, call us, we'll make it happen. So thank you, Brian. Much appreciated. Thank you all.